So let's start off with a little story time here from syracuse.com. Syracuse football beat out one of its regional recruiting rivals at another Power 4 school for the commitment of three-star defensive lineman Elijah Crawford on Friday. Crawford had a top three of Syracuse, Rutgers, and West Virginia and announced his commitment via social media. He visited all three programs in June. Crawford is the seventh player in the Orange's class to choose Syracuse while also holding a Rutgers offer, according to listings on 247 Sports. The two schools have been neck and neck this recruiting cycle. This is fascinating, folks. Syracuse and Rutgers. Look at the scoreboard of the 2025 recruiting rankings, according to 247. Rutgers has 29 commitments as we record this. Syracuse has 28. Now, a key difference. The Scarlet Knights have 7 four-star prospects, according to the 247 composite. Syracuse just lost its only four-star commitment. Now, Fran Brown just started here a few months ago and has done a lot in that time. As you can tell by the numbers, Greg Schiano has a little bit of a head start, having been at Rutgers longer. But what's up at Rutgers? Why are the Scarlet Knights landing so many commits and so many four-star commits at this point? Now, we've had a closer view of why Syracuse has had this recruiting surge. Fran Brown, his reputation precedes him as one of the top recruiters in the country. We know New Jersey is an important state for talent for both schools, but how intense is this getting? Is there a battle of New Jersey blossoming here between Syracuse and Rutgers? Or are they not going after the same players due to a number of factors, including Syracuse being in the ACC, Rutgers being in the Big Ten? And on another note, can we get these two together again? Syracuse and Rutgers played in 2021. I get it. Wasn't exactly a barn burner of a game, but these two should play more. I brought in Brian Fonseca from NJ.com to answer all of these questions. He's their excellent Rutgers beat reporter. We talk recruiting, we talk scheduling, we talk Jersey, Fran Brown, Greg Schiano. Remember Fran Brown at one point on Greg Schiano's staff. And this emerging battle of New Jersey between Syracuse and Rutgers that has been fascinating to watch to this point, and certainly will be fascinating to watch going forward. So we'll hear from Brian here shortly, but I want to remind you to become a Syracuse Sports Insider, because being a Syracuse Sports Insider means you get all the commitments. When they happen, we text them to you. If I have any breaking news, you get it first. Opinions, thoughts, top 5 Fridays. That's been a lot of fun to do the past couple of weeks, and just a personal connection. You want to text me? You can do it. All you have to do is sign up to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. Text the word orange, if you haven't already, to 315-847-3895. That'll connect you for 2 weeks free to become a Syracuse Sports Insider. It's just $3.99 a month. After that, direct text messaging with me. It's not a group text, okay? I don't know about you. Those aren't my favorite. But you're in a group. You're part of a community with the Syracuse Sports Insiders. Your thoughts, your opinions, your questions, your suggestions for podcasts in terms of subjects, in terms of guests on the pod, all there for you, and the advantage of being a Syracuse Sports Insider. I do want to note this. If you are a musician and you want your music to be featured here on the Syracuse Sports Podcast, get in touch. Drop me an email, send me a text. If you are a Syracuse Sports Insider, we are going to start featuring your original music on this podcast. Now, I have to be clear about this. Original music. Hey, Brent, you should play more Beatles. No. We can't play already registered commercial music. I'm a big Stones fan. Look, I love my man Bruce Springsteen. I don't have the license to play Bruce Springsteen music on this pod, but what we can do is we can feature your original music. So get in touch. I'll give you the details, just a couple of things that we would have to work out. We need your permission to use the music and a couple little details that I need on the technical side. But please, if you are a musician, if you know somebody in a band that plays music and they're looking for exposure, let's help out the pod community here and make music a bigger part of the Syracuse Sports Podcast going forward. So get in touch. My email, all the information in the show notes to get in touch. And we're happy to do that going forward. We're also happy to talk some Syracuse, Rutgers, the Battle of New Jersey. Let's hear from Brian. So, Brian, we welcome you in here. It should be duly noted. We also did ask the great Steve Politi to come on, but he big timed us. He's going to London. He's covering the Olympics, going to Paris, right? So, Brian, you and I, just two guys talking about football. Steve is like international media superstar here on the Olympic trail.
We're the only real football guys. Steve's more of a fencing guy, I guess. Fencing,
exactly.
Gymnastics, track, swimming. We're football guys, though.
Pure football all the way, all summer long. We can let Steve go handle the synchronized swimming and all that other stuff for sure. This is interesting, Brian, because as we speak now, this could change by the time this podcast comes out. But as we are recording this, Rutgers 29, Syracuse 28, the number of commitments in the class of 2025. It's been fascinating to see that this horse race emerge between these old Big East rivals here. And look, obviously, both schools have always mined New Jersey. It's always been a very important state for both, certainly for Rutgers being there, Syracuse, going back to the 1980s, certainly when Paul Pasqualoni was the head coach into the 90s. And through his run, some coaches after him, not so much. They kind of dropped the ball when it came to New Jersey. But for the most part, it has always been a state that both programs value. And I feel like so much is coming to a head here. So I kind of get a sense from Syracuse, of course, with Fran Brown's recruiting acknowledgments. He's rated as the top recruiter in the country, according to 247 Sports. He's from New Jersey, right? We've heard that side of it. Let me turn to you, Brian, for the Rutgers side of this and where Greg Schiano is at and why this class is up to 29 and counting.
Yeah, I think Greg is really doing what he was able to do the first time around and taking a downtrodden Rutgers program. The second time around was almost as bad as the first time around, right? Except now he has proof of concept. He's shown he could do it the first time around. And now in 4 years, he's building it back to a point where they had it roughly. This is very similar to the 05-06 era. A lot of players that I spoke to from that era last year said that last season felt like the kind of year before the year. You're building kind of a foundation of talent that you then convert into a breakthrough season. They had their first bowl game appearance in almost a decade last year, beat Miami in the Pinstripe Bowl, went 6-6. That is much different than the downtrodden years of the Chris Ash era, the first couple of years under Schiano where they were getting their feet under them. They've built a foundation on the field that's obviously helped them in recruiting. Greg Schiano has always been a really strong recruiter of coordinators he really trusts. Now all that together has brought Rutgers to a point where they can go out and recruit a lot of highly talented kids. They have 7 kids that are 4-star recruits in the composite rankings. They're part of it is also the numbers of kids they have, but they're really in contention right now to have their greatest recruiting class ever, similar to where Rutgers was at when Greg Schiano left for the NFL in 2011. That's when they had their greatest recruiting class to this point. This class, again, by average recruit ranking in 247 is right at the same level. So I think this is a mix of everything going right at this point: recruiting, results on the field, some hype entering the 2024 season. People feel like it could be their best year in over a decade, kind of a similar 06 level, maybe not to that level of success, but that level of excitement. So everything's kind of going right at the same moment. And obviously with a huge June in recruiting, that's kind of been to this point, the high mark.
A lot to take in there, Brian, but I have to turn to this because it's that question you have to ask in college sports these days. Where is Rutgers at in terms of NIL and in the transfer portal and the resources that you need in order to entice some players? Now, you just noted it there, Greg, the Jersey roots. This is his second time around there at Rutgers. He has some built-in tactical advantages here that maybe you don't have to go to NIL and some of the things that we know out there. But where is Rutgers at there? Now, they certainly have the Big Ten money coming in every year, which is a huge advantage. But in the here and now and the modern stories we hear so much about, how's Rutgers doing in that department?
It's an interesting question that everyone wants to know, and the answer almost certainly will never come. These things are always in the shadows. If you ask them directly, they'll tell you one answer. If you ask someone else, they'll tell you another answer because it's all different interests, right? So I can't answer that question directly. What I could say is the big focus with NIL in the last couple of years has been retention, keeping their top players, and they saw a lot of success in doing that this offseason. They brought back a lot of seniors who either could have gone to the NFL, could have gone into the transfer portal. They decided to come back, do one last run, and build on last year. Some of that can be, relationships. Some of that could be wanting to help the program, all that stuff. But obviously, as we all know, NIL is the number one priority for a vast majority of college athletes, as it should be. So retention-wise, They've done a really good job. And by those results, you can assume that the NIL program is pretty decent. As for future recruits, I don't think Rutgers is a program that entices highly talented freshmen to come through NIL. I do think that what you mentioned, the NCAA decision, that eventually kids will be able to be paid by the schools. Rutgers being in the Big Ten, a conference that is going to provide them a lot of money through the TV rights. These kids are going to have a lot of opportunities to make money at Rutgers that they wouldn't be able to at an ACC school, for example, in Syracuse, which is probably not going to have the financial support that a school in the Big Ten will, for example. So I think that is probably a big part of the pitch to these freshman incoming kids, is that in the future, Rutgers is going to be really well positioned to be able to be one of the schools that can pay their student athletes at a higher level than, I don't know this for a fact, I'm not in the recruiting pitches, I don't know this, but I can tell. I would be very surprised if it wasn't part of the recruiting pitch.
Brian, one thing you noted there is something that I think is interesting here. Now, Fran Brown's in year one. Greg Schiano obviously had a head start here and has a built-in reputation and can get through these names. We mentioned the ACC Big Ten component. Maybe this is part of it. But a major difference, even though the numbers are similar, is that Rutgers is, I believe it's up to 10, correct me if I'm wrong, 4-star commitments in this class. Syracuse has no 4-star commitments in this class. Now, again, new coach. Fran is rebuilding a roster. He's bringing in people in the image of the team that he wants to build. He's throwing a lot of offers out there from, highly rated guys. There's a Byron Washington, for example, who's an offensive lineman from Texas, who's 6'7", 380 pounds, right? Some top-rated players in the state of New York, people that you would assume that Fran Brown's going to go after. But there's some athletes and some people he's taking a chance on that he's getting offers out there to, and he's kind of seeing what he gets in that department. So some Syracuse fans have certainly noticed that. They're saying, hey, this is great, but where are some of the highly rated guys? Of those 4-star athletes that Rutgers has brought in, who are some of the names fans are excited about, and who are some of the bigger splashes you think that Rutgers grabbed that fit that profile?
Right, and I think one of them, off the bat, the latest one, Kamar Archie, is a great example of the advantage Rutgers has in Schiano being there so long. They started recruiting this kid in 8th grade. When he was at Ewing High School. He's gone to the Hunt School. He's been to Rutgers probably 24 times in the past 3 or 4 years, games, camps, junior days, every chance he can get. And that built-in relationship, having all that built-in equity, has resulted in him picking Rutgers over Clemson and Michigan, which legitimately wanted him, right? So I think that's part of the recruiting advantage they have there from being so long that Fran Brown probably needs a couple of years to develop as great a recruiter he is. He can't just make up 4 years of recruiting in 1 year, obviously. Michael Thomas III, highly touted 4-star wide receiver out of Toms River, plays at Donovan Catholic. That's a kid they prioritized as wide receiver. Tariq Hayer, a safety out of Washington, D.C., he is their highest rated kid, highly a strong win for them. Jalen Matthews, a 4-star kid out of Toms River. He was once committed to Penn State, was once considered a Georgia lean, ultimately ends up at Rutgers. There's a big group. There's a kid. I can't remember his first name. Apologies. Last name is Wynn from Michigan. 4-star offensive lineman. Legitimately beat one of the in-state schools. I believe it was Michigan State for his services. So not only is Rutgers getting these highly touted kids, it's 7 4-stars on the 247 Sports Composite, which I personally use. But if you go through all the services, it's I believe 10. At least one service is a 4-star. They're not only getting these highly touted kids, they're beating out legitimate competition to get these kids. So I think that's really the encouraging part because, stars are what they are. They matter. These are recruiting analysts at the end of the day that are doing it. When you're beating out other coaches that you were competing against on the field for recruits they badly want, I think that's a really strong sign of the high level of talent that you're getting.
So with Fran Brown at Syracuse, Brian, of course, he's got the Jersey roots from Camden. He coached at Rutgers on his path to being the head coach at Syracuse. How much have you heard about that Fran's back, that Syracuse is making some gains in the recruiting wars in the state, some commitments they got, some transfers that they got that were at other schools, of course, but have those Jersey roots? That has been a big theme with this Syracuse team of a lot of Jersey guys that played youth football together, as a matter of fact, that have found their way to Syracuse here. But with Fran's connections to the state, how much has that been a topic of conversation on your beat?
It certainly was a big one when he was hired. Fran Brown, seen as one of the great recruiters of New Jersey, one of the great recruiters in the country, as you mentioned, was once the top recruiter in the entire country, according to 247. He was a strong Jersey recruiter when he was at Rutgers, helped Greg Schiano put together a really strong initial class in 2020, flipping guys like Max Melton and Tyrene Powell from South Jersey, where he's really, that's his area of expertise. did a great job recruiting that area when he was at Temple, did a great job doing that area when he was at Rutgers, and clearly at Syracuse, that's going to be an area of emphasis. And I think that was part of the initial reaction of, is Fran Brown going to come into New Jersey and start taking a lot of the recruits that Rutgers is going after? Early results say no, right? I believe Rutgers has 10 New Jersey recruits, a lot of the top end kids in the state as well. I believe Syracuse has 2, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe the early results, that first full class, doesn't really reflect that reality, which I think is a big part of this recruiting class for Rutgers, is that they're not losing out these kids to a local rival like Syracuse. And I guess people will hear me call them a local rival. There will be some debate on both sides of the fence of whether they are.
It should be. We're gonna talk about that.
We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But I think that is part of the success as well. So I think the initial fear has not been realized yet, but I think people are conscious of, if Syracuse can put together a strong season this year, and they have the easiest schedule in the country according to ESPN's FBI, with Rutgers being number 3 on that list, maybe they can build on that momentum and attack New Jersey. But I think so far the results have shown that Rutgers has been able to kind of keep Syracuse and Fran Brown at bay to this point.
Brian, the next couple of questions kind of fall in the category of what Syracuse is up against in New Jersey. And I'll start with this. Who are the schools that are most successful in that state recruiting now?
Recruiting recruiting New Jersey athletes, you're saying?
Correct.
I can't say there's a major team now. Rutgers is doing a good job in this cycle. Ohio State typically comes in and gets whoever they want. That, I believe they have 2 top commits from DePaul, both going there in the 2025 class. Michigan under Jim Harbaugh typically, maybe not towards the end, but in the beginning, was snapping up every top kid when he had Chris Partridge on his staff. Guys like Jabril Peppers and Rashawn Gary. So I don't know if there is Georgia, when Fran Brown was on staff, was getting kids out of New Jersey as well. So I don't know if there's one dominant team. I think the top level teams are always looking for that top end talent in New Jersey, like they do with every state. But I think at least in the 25 class, Rutgers has done a really good job of targeting guys and landing guys they really want on the higher end of the scale.
Okay, so here's my second part of that question and what they're up against. Recruiting is all about relationships, as we know, and Fran has really upgraded Syracuse in that department just from all the people that he knows in New Jersey. Another name to throw into the mix here, and there was not a lot of holdover from Dino Baber's staff to Fran Brown's staff. There was a few names, and one of them was Nunzio Campanelli. And Nunzio, of course, is a Jersey guy, and he knows every coach in the state, and he could just get in a lot of rooms that Syracuse typically, over the past 15 years or so, would have difficulty doing. Now, I brought up Paul Pasqualoni earlier. Back in the day, if you will, Paul Pasqualoni and George DeLeon, they were beloved in that state. They knew every high school coach in that state. They would do clinics for New Jersey coaches. There was such a pipeline between that state and Syracuse, and they had a lot to do with it. And in the coaches that came afterwards, Greg Robinson, Doug Marone, Scott Schaefer, Dino Babers, the results, to say the least, were mixed here. So tell me about that unit, if you will, of New Jersey high school coaches and how important it is to have relationships with them that this staff certainly seems to have an advantage with right off the bat.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge just like in every other state, but in New Jersey especially. A lot of the talent is concentrated in the Big North, the league of Catholic schools, the Bergen Catholics, Paramus Catholics, Don Bosco, St. Peter's Prep. A lot of the top-end talent in the state goes to those schools. And Rutgers historically has had some trouble breaking into those schools outside of Greg Schiano's couple tenures there. They've had a lot of success in this class, gotten guys like Chris Vigna, an offensive lineman out of Bergen Catholic. Last recruiting cycle, they got this kid, 4-star safety, Kosh Sanders, and he's kind of seen as the example that they're setting of kids that go to those schools, are highly touted, have a lot of options, and they choose to stay home at Rutgers. Now they're kind of repeating that formula with a lot of kids they have now. Fran Brown, as I said, a lot of strong relationships in South Jersey. That's where he's from. He's from Camden. And that area has had a lot of talent as of late. It's really surged as an area of talent in the last 3 or 4 years, I'd say, 5 years maybe. And Nunzio Campanelli has the relationships in North Jersey. His brother Vito is the head coach at Bergen Catholic. He coached in that league for years from multiple schools, and he knows everyone, I would guess, in that area. So I think that is certainly an advantage to have him in there. You could correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure how many kids they've gotten to commit from that area in this class, but that might be something that kind of pays dividends down the line.
And it's not to say they haven't gotten some players along the way. I mean, the most notable was Tommy DeVito, who committed to Syracuse. He didn't finish his career at Syracuse, but that was a major recruiting score for the Orange at the time. And there's been players, Elijah Clark has transferred in, and again, the flood that has come since Fran has taken over, notably Kyle McCord and some other players that are now on the Syracuse roster. But I just felt like for so long, Syracuse broke one of its major pipelines, and they've been repairing it since Paul Pasqualoni was fired, and it feels like Fran Brown, all of us, we're doing a lot of summer traveling, right? And I don't know what it is with Pennsylvania, but there's always construction in Pennsylvania. I went to Boston for so long. And what I'm getting at is like one day you drive in, you're like, oh, they stopped the project. Like the big dig's over. The construction is done. That's what I kind of feel like with Fran. There's so many of those fractured pipes, and like you're always driving through construction zones, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. Between Fran and Nunzio and some other factors that you brought up there, Brian, I feel like Syracuse maybe hasn't fully repaired the pipeline. You said they've got some work to be done and some commitments and other thing, but I feel like it's as strong as it has been in years. So we've mentioned the success of Rutgers numbers-wise, the players from New Jersey that have come in, the 4 stars that are there. Brian, what is the expectation for Rutgers now? That it feels like they've had some recruiting success here, and Schiano, obviously beloved in that state, and everybody understands the challenge they're up against here in the Big Ten. That certainly has to be noted here. But how is this all building towards this 2024 season and what people expect Rutgers can be?
There are a lot of expectations coming into the 2024 season just because, again, everything is working well together. This is the first year that Rutgers won't face any of the big 3, Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan, since they joined the Big Ten. Now that they've gotten rid of the divisions, that obviously changes everything because those were 3 automatic losses every year, essentially, outside of 2014 when they beat Michigan. So that opens things up a lot. They play, like I said, the 3rd easiest schedule in the country, according to FPI, which you can take that for whatever it's worth. But the reality is that on paper, the schedule is much more manageable than it has ever been for Rutgers in the Big Ten. You take that and you consider that, again, the defense, which was the backbone of this team last year, their strength returns almost every starter from last year. They lost Max Melton to the NFL draft. They lost Maya Hanatu to graduation. He was a big part of their defensive line, but they bring back a lot of guys, and they bring back some talented players, young players from last season who may have an opportunity to play now with the spaces open. So they hope that the defense, with their defensive coordinator, Joe Harris-Simiak, who's back for another year, he's really an up-and-coming star as a coach, as a recruiter. They hope that him coming back, all these players coming back, the defense could take another step forward again. And then offensively, you bring back a lot of your base. Big Ten's leading rusher, Kyle Monungai, most of the offensive line that took a jump last year. You upgrade wide receivers significantly, and you improve, you hope, at quarterback. Gavin Wimsatt, who for 2 years in a row was the least accurate quarterback in FBS football, transfers to Kentucky. You bring in Ethan Kaliakmanis from Minnesota, whose numbers are not as great as you'd like to see for an upgrade, but he does reunite with Kirk Shiraka, the offensive coordinator, who was his offensive coordinator to start his career at Minnesota, had a lot of success together in their 1 year together. You hope that that relationship kind of helps him take a step forward, helps Rutgers take a step forward as an offense with him, hoping that, again, Kyle Monungai is as good as he was last year, hoping the offensive line takes a step forward, hoping all the wide receiver talent you've put together also takes a step forward, because that's been a position that Rutgers has had a lot of struggles in for years. And if all goes together, if you take advantage of all the opportunities on the schedule, and you have, the expectations are probably somewhere between 8 wins, maybe 9 wins on the high end, right? If you can have a season like that, then you take all the wins you've had in recruiting in June, you solidify those commitments, and you really get a head of steam heading into the 26 class and beyond. So if all goes well for Rutgers, this can be a 2006 season, maybe not in success on the field, but as far as momentum, what they can build off of this going forward, fan-wise, recruiting-wise, just everything. A big opportunity here for Rutgers is essentially the status.
I'm smiling because this all sounds familiar, because Syracuse has this breath of life from Fran Brown, the talent that they brought in, what the portal allows you to kind of cut down on the process, notably at quarterback. Syracuse has a lot of returning talent from last year, but also they have a favorable schedule, at least on paper, and that they don't play Florida State and Clemson this year. And I would throw North Carolina and Louisville in there too, who are 2 programs that Louisville's been down but is expected to be back this year. And Carolina's obviously had recent success. We're all kind of wondering what happens now that Drake May has moved on and they have some losses there. But to hear you describe that, Brian, that's what Syracuse fans are thinking here. That's what Rutgers fans are thinking there. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic goes, not only from the interest of the fan bases, but what we're talking about here and the recruiting gains and the momentum that we have to see. Because the big difference is Greg Schiano has shown his cards on the field. He has shown his head coaching prowess. Fran Brown hasn't coached a game yet at Syracuse. So that's the big thing we're all wondering about, where seemingly he's checked every other box he's had to.
Totally agree. I think that's always the big question mark and kind of the curiosity about the Syracuse season is, can Fran Brown take all the success he's had in recruiting? No one questions how good a team he can put together, because he has always been great at convincing talent to come play for him. Can he make that talent play to the level that they are expected to? That's the big question. I think that's what makes Syracuse good. That's what's going to make Syracuse one of the more fascinating teams to follow this season. And like you said, huge opportunity given what the schedule is. Going to be interesting to watch for sure.
Brian, I always enjoyed the Syracuse Rutgers series when they were in the Big East together, and there's been some moments there. And you mentioned that 2006 season, some peaks that we saw, some really interesting games between these two over the years, and of course that faded when Syracuse went to the ACC and Rutgers ends up in the Big Ten. Syracuse and Rutgers played in 2021. 17-7 barn burner at the Dome. I believe that was a 0-0 game at halftime, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. So maybe that game's not a good example of why they should revive this series, but let me just throw that question out there. I'm somebody that, and I get how schedules go and they got to balance these things out. I get all that stuff, but generally speaking, I think these two should play more. Do you agree?
I agree from my personal standpoint. I agree from a fan standpoint. I think there's nothing more exciting than playing local teams, local high, Power 5 teams, Power 4 teams, whatever you want to call it. I think there's really, for everyone outside the programs, nothing to lose and everything to gain. It would be an awesome game. I think inside programs, you could probably argue there's always a risk recruiting wise, because you could think you win, but what if you lose? That's going to be something used against you in recruiting. If you lose, it hurts you in your pursuit of a college football playoff spot, right? People might be laughing hearing this between Rutgers and Syracuse, but if you have a really good year, a really good team like Rutgers has this year, you have to take every opportunity you have to build that resume. And it's a lot easier to beat Temple and Wagner and whoever you have on your schedule, Howard, than it is to beat Syracuse.
That's right.
That might help your resume. It might hurt it too. So I think they should play every local team that of Power 5, every former Big East foe. Get Boston College on the schedule. They had them a couple times over the last few years. Syracuse, get all these guys on the schedule. I think it'd be great for college football, for local college football, for Northeast college football. I don't know if I'd bet much that it would happen going forward, but I guess you never really know.
Brian, great stuff. Really appreciate your time and your insight into this. It's been fascinating to watch this bubble up as quickly as it has. Syracuse kind of getting in on this, but Rutgers being in the lead. We'll see how the horse race goes going forward here and who wins the crown, if you will, and a burgeoning rivalry between Syracuse and Rutgers again, and the recruiting battles that we shall see going forward here with so many New Jersey connections. Thank you so much for your time. Keep up the good work there at NJ.com. We'll do it again down the road, my friend.
Same to you, Brent. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, thanks again for hanging on Syracuse Sports today, guys. Thanks to Brian Fonseca. Great insight on the Battle of New Jersey between Syracuse and Rutgers. Hey, if you missed it, on the pod last week, we had a guy named Mike Tirico. Perhaps you've heard of him, one of the more prominent sportscasters in the world, set to host the Olympics in prime time for the fourth time for NBC Sports. But Mike also had some fascinating takes on what is going on in the broad world of college sports and how Syracuse fits into all of it. So if you missed that pod, well, check it out. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. That's a good reminder to subscribe to Syracuse Sports and all of those places, wherever you get your podcasts. So a new, fresh episode, when it's ready, it appears to you, you can listen on demand. I want to thank Tanner Carter, our featured musician today on Syracuse Sports. All the information on where you can find Tanner's music is in the show notes, and we're going to feature a song of Tanner's in its entirety right after I get done talking here at the end of the podcast. So thank you, Tanner, for that great song that you sent us for today's show. And thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders for their insight, their analysis, their opinion, their ideas, their recipes, everything that you guys have sent. Always appreciate hearing from our Syracuse Sports Insiders. Anytime, text me directly at 315-847-3895. If you haven't signed up today, Get ahead of the game, man. Get the breaking news first. Get all the information and analysis and opinions and maybe I'll share recipes with you if you want. I got plenty, right? Be a Syracuse Sports Insider by signing up if you haven't already. Text the word orange to 315-847-3895. Try it free for 2 weeks, and that's just $3.99 a month after that. Less than $1 a week to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. You kidding me? It's the deal of the summer. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of the Syracuse Sports Insider community. We'll catch you next time here on Syracuse Sports.